So, welcome to the Stand Tall Strength and Wellbeing podcast. We are two guys on a mission to learn more about looking after our physical and mental health and hopefully get others to do the same. This is not and never will be medical advice. Our podcast is there to inform and generate discussion. If you are struggling with your mental or physical health, please discuss with your GP, allocated health professional, and/or reach out for support. For more information about what we do and all our social media information, please visit standtallwales.co.uk. Please like, subscribe, comment, and get in touch.
So yeah, I mean that's. As I said to her, you can't do that when you're naked. It's just too dangerous. Yeah. Anyway, how are you, Paul?
I'm very well, Chaz. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Too bad. It's getting a bit late, so topping up with coffee. Not good after midday, but
oh, Chaz, come on! If you like read Matt Walker, do you listen to Andrew Huberman? You
I
can't be
do.
drinking coffee this time of day. Come on.
Oh, I know. I don't know if we want to get a sponsorship, but AeroPress be happy to take money off you or products. It's good stuff.
Oh, you've got an AeroPress, have you?
Yeah, I got an AeroPress.
Was that my influence?
It could be. I was eyeing up the milk frothers in Morrison's the other day as well. Hopefully she'll take the hint and get me one for Christmas.
Yeah. I rate an AeroPress. If I had enough time, I would just do videos on me making coffees in my AeroPress, and
nice.
I'm not sure anyone would watch them though. But there you go.
Yeah. Anyway, depression. I think that's what we talk about, isn't it? As opposed to coffee.
Yeah. So depression. So it's our kind of second podcast, and then the first one we talked about an introduction to men and sort of mental health and what we plan on doing. Yeah, and we thought a good place to start would be depression.
Super. We can go into loads of biology on this one. Do we maybe want to start off with the higher level stuff? What is depression, Paul? I mean, do you just have the moody blues? What's all this about? I've heard of it before.
What is depression? Yeah. Really big question. It's a very difficult question. And I think, simply put, I think depression is a diagnostic label, isn't it? So I'm not in a position to diagnose anyone with depression. Being a nurse, not my job, but being aware of the kind of depression criteria is important. I think I'm not sure whether you've heard of this, Jazz, but have you heard of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual number 5?
DMSA. Is there something like
DSM? Yeah, DSM-5.
DSM.
And there's one, the World Health Organization used, which is the ICD, which I think they're on issue 10, I think. And so these manuals that have all the diagnostic criteria, all the kind of terms. So fundamentally, depression's a set of symptoms that fit the diagnostic criteria of depression. And I know a lot of these are very obvious to people, but having a depressed mood most of the time or nearly every day, lack of pleasure nearly every day, kind of weight changes, weight gain, appetite changes, physical slowing of your body, so just thinking slower or moving slower, whether that's observable or not, fatigue, feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness, guilt, diminished ability to think and concentrate, thoughts of death, suicidal ideation, and these sort of things aren't explained by other health problems or other mental health conditions. So they're essentially the symptoms. And in order to be diagnosed with depression, you would need to see a clinician who's a specialist, and they would have to be able to tick off all these sort of boxes and sort of say that you have depression. And then there's lots of different types of depression as well. There's probably far more than I'm aware of as well. But the main one being sort of major depressive disorder, or MDD, and that refers to quite an acute, some more short-term bout of depression, to quite significant symptoms, typically kind of 2 weeks period or more, and then you have the kind of more longer-term depression. And so I think it's changed names. It used to be called dysthymia. Now it's persistent depressive disorder, which is more of a longer term, just below major depressive disorder, but it kind of goes on for 2 years. sort of in duration. Both very serious problems, very difficult to manage sometimes for people, and when they're severe as well, it can be debilitating. And then, like in the UK, just to kind of make things a bit more confusing as well, we tend to divide them into sort of 3 or 4 sections. So subclinical being, they got symptoms, but it doesn't meet any threshold. Mild, moderate, severe. So mild being it's kind of mild impact on someone's life. Moderate being it's a moderate impact. Then severe being it's significant. It's a clearly having a very big impact on their social, occupational, just day-to-day stuff. So that, in a nutshell, is so what depression is. I guess that's from a very medical perspective, I suppose. But yeah, does that sort of make sense, Charles?
Yeah, I mean, well, it does to me. I've had to do a lot of reading on this one. I think you've pretty much wrapped up the podcast there, Paul. We can just go home now.
Yeah.
You've covered a lot there. Maybe we should go back and talk a bit about what you've said. Have you got a checklist there that you were reading down by?
No, yeah. So literally, again, all I've done there is I've just wrote down all the diagnostic criteria that's in the DSM. So I might sound very intelligent, but I just read up.
We circle back. What was the first one you mentioned there?
Depressed mood.
Depressed mood. So what are we talking about there with depressed mood? Feeling a bit blue, or is there something more to that?
Yeah, it's depressed. I think taking a huge step back here, and when we say the depression or depressed, it's sometimes people use it as, I feel a bit depressed. The local shop ran out of, I don't know, tins of custard. I feel a bit depressed. We use that term really flippantly, don't we? We talk about being depressed as just being like, interchangeable with a bit sad or a bit ticked off. But yeah, when we talk about depressed mood, it's this idea of everything being turned down. And when I talk to clients who are struggling with depression, I often say, like, a good way of understanding what depression is the word depress, which I have not looked at it in the dictionary, but I imagine it'll say something like to turn something down or push something down or suppress something, like. And that's kind of how I see depression is everything about you, the way you feel, your mood, everything's just dampened down. So a depressed mood can be just it could be feeling nothing, feeling low, feeling just really kind of sad or down. But it's an emotion, but it's all kind of just turned down. It's that, I think that's. And I guess depression is quite hard because it can vary and change. And I think another thing, just to add more confusion to depression, is when we, from a kind of cognitive behavioral therapy perspective as well, that depression, the emotions that go alongside depression tend to be anything. It could be anger. It could be, guilt, shame, apathy, feeling nothing at all, numbness. So there's a huge range of emotions come under depression. But it's the idea that everything's turned down with depression.
Yeah, so I think you packed something in there quite tightly I'd like to unpick. You gave that first example about the shop running out of milk. There's also, if you want to dig a bit more into that, you're talking about the difference between reacting to something that's happening appropriately and everything appearing to be depressed. Everything is getting you down. I think because obviously if something horrible's happened to you, then you might quite rightly feel depressed about it. Whereas I think what we try and differentiate a bit more with depression is it's an inappropriate response. Everything makes you feel down about everything. Is that correct, or?
Yeah.
Completely butchered that.
No. It's absolutely right. And I think it touched on something that's really important. And I think we'll probably go on to talk about this, but there is a genuine response, isn't it? A genuine response of sadness, of feeling depressed when something really bad happens. If you've gone through loss or grief or a really difficult life stressor, you could probably tick a lot of boxes for the depression criteria, can you? You could feel down and hopeless. You could feel really numb. You could just lose your appetite or whatever it might be. And that could be depression.
Yeah.
If you look at the criteria. But is it depression? I don't know. It's really tough. But you're right there. Some people who have depression, the more kind of longer term, that persistent depression, this is where it gets really messy I think, and quite complicated. That it's a mixture of biological stuff going on. I'm not saying the biological stuff's causing it, but there's a mixture of the cognitive stuff going on, so that the person will think a certain way, will think everything in a very negative way. And I'm sure we can go on and talk about some of the kind of the thinking element a bit later as well. So it's everything. It's that persistent stuff. It's thinking is negative. The way they deal with problems is negative. The way they feel is really bad, negative, numb, nothing. The way they deal with emotions can be really negative. Everything around them is negative. And it really kind of messes things up and makes things really kind of long-term and chronic and difficult and hard to get out of. And I guess there's more long-term depressions there. They're really tough to to snap out of. Or you need help sometimes.
Yeah. Anyway, Checklist Charlie, what you got next on your list?
Well, I've the symptoms now, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anhedonia. Do you know what that is?
Yeah. Not enjoying anything.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. Didn't you study Latin? And am I right in thinking that at some point in the past? You could probably tell us the words.
Studying's the wrong verb there.
Oh, okay.
We that was a free pass to mess around. We absolutely destroyed our Latin teacher.
Yeah.
So many things I regret in school. I wish I could have bloody concentrated, because when I studied radiography, it would have come in useful. Everything in the medical world is in Latin.
Yeah.
Yeah, anhedonia. I highlighted that somewhere. Where did I highlight that? Dopamine. Yeah, I think something to do with dopamine.
What? Don't expect me to know the answer. You're the one listening to the Huberman Lab recently.
So easy. I can't just rip it off. We're gonna pretend like I'm working for the knowledge. Yeah.
We need to do like with Huberman. We should every time we say his name, we should have this like ha, sort of angelic sort of sound. And can you do like a little gif or something of his face in the corner just to appear?
I could. I want to try and keep this classy though.
Okay.
Yeah. So anhedonia. What causes it? Why haven't you fixed it yet?
Yeah, again, I think it's a really hard thing to sort of say what causes it. So I think I'll get my sort of cognitive behavioral therapy hat on here. And so when people struggle with feeling very depressed or struggle with symptoms of depression, people are often caught in a bit of a rut, a bit of a cycle. The term we often use is a vicious cycle. And for those people who know a little bit about CBT, it's different areas of a circle essentially. So the way you think tends to be very negative. Negative thoughts about self, negative thoughts about your future, other people. I am this is going to happen, and whenever faced with a problem, you just kind of jump on negative thoughts about that problem. Emotions are going to be sort of depressed too. So you're going to feel pretty numb. You're going to feel sad, down, low, angry, guilt, shame, hopeless, stress. All those feelings can come under that umbrella of depression too. Physically, you're going to feel quite lethargic. You're going to feel just drained, tired, fatigued. And then sort of, what are you going to do with that? You're going to probably do less. So the way people behave and act when they're feeling depressed is they sort of switch off, withdraw, isolate, avoid, just do less of the good stuff. And when you sort of do less things that are good for you, you miss out on those opportunities to feel good. And I've got a really sort of cheesy analogy that I often use as well. And I think sometimes seeing depression a bit like a bucket. So you imagine a bucket that has got holes in. So there's a few holes in this bucket. And when that bucket's full, you feel good. You feel optimal. Your body's doing all the right stuff. You're expressing emotions, the range of emotions appropriately. When things happen, you feel happy or sad or whatever is appropriate for that situation you're in. When that bucket's empty, you're really, really low, really depressed. So everyone's bucket kind of drains over time, and you need to kind of do things to keep that bucket topped up. So you need to, eat well, sleep well, do the good stuff, be around good people, be in nature, all those good stuff that keeps things that bucket topped up. But for some people who are depressed, they get caught in that cycle where they begin to withdraw, isolate, turn their phone off, cancel plans, maybe start going to the gym, stop eating well, or maybe eating a bit too much at night, or binge eating stuff, binge watching stuff. Doing all the sort of things that on their own aren't too bad, but in the long term are probably quite bad for you. And then that bucket just drains. So it gets to the point where that bucket's empty. And I guess I don't know loads about the physiology side of things and the biology and the role of dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine and all these sort of things. But when that's empty, your body's not functioning great. So you're probably low on all the chemicals in your body that should make you feel good. So I think then that's where the anhedonia starts to kick in. So when I think that it's that all the stuff you haven't done is, and that bucket's now drained. And that's where the anhedonia kicks in. I think, did Andrew Huberman say something along the lines of, you get like a dopamine sort of deficit after doing something that's really sort of enjoyable, and that can sometimes cause, low that anhedonia. That also rings a bell as well. But
yeah, I mean, obviously, we want to preface this with we're not neurochemists.
No.
But from my understanding of it is, what people really chase is the pursuit of the payoff. So leading up to achieving something, essentially, that's the feeling that we really chase. And the release of dopamine drives us towards achieving something, putting in effort. And what was really interesting was dopamine is actually a precursor for noradrenaline. So it gets converted naturally into noradrenaline, and that is basically like an energy currency for the neurological system. So it gives us, adrenaline gives us loads of energy. And then when you actually achieve that thing, you're no longer in that pursuit. You don't have the release of dopamine, so you do have a drop off. And there is a down regulation, and that down regulation is actually required as well. Because if you are continuously chasing that dopamine, and you see this in things like gambling addiction, where you're continuously trying to win, and there's no period where you're resting and taking that down regulation, that's when the addictive behavior starts to kick in. Because you're continuously chasing that dragon, essentially.
Yeah. So it seems like in depression, there's none of that kind of pleasure from the sort of the dopamine being there. Just isn't, is it? It's low. Even that kind of that. Well, I guess when they do chase it, it's probably gonna be something that's gonna be a really quick kind of nasty fix. But someone who's depressed, is all that dopamine firing off when it needs to is just not gonna. You're gonna feel just down and dampens. And I see it all the time with people I speak to, and it's really, really sad. And I often speak to people, and one of the questions that we ask, if they seem depressed, and if I'm assessing someone, for example, I'll say, when was the last time you enjoyed yourself or had fun or did something kind of worthwhile or you got a bit of achievement from? And time and time again, people say, I don't remember, I don't know. And even though they may have done things that have been fantastic or great, or they may have been positive life events that happened recently, they either just don't get the positive response from those situations, which is really horrible. The next thing on the list there is the slowing down of thoughts, a reduction of physical movement, which can be observed or not observed. But
reduction of physical movement. What?
Yeah, slowing of thoughts, a reduction of movement. So I think it's I see
Is
a
there-
lot. I'm sorry.
Is there another name for this of vegetation? Not meant.
Yeah, I guess in the very severe sort of form, that kind of catatonic state, I suppose. But
Right.
I guess typically, I think even just kind of mild depression, sometimes people will just moving quickly, or they think they just can't move as much, or just the ability to think things through just becomes really labored. So it's quite common if people are kind of feeling really lethargic, and I guess metabolically everything's sort of really low as well.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk about the autonomic nervous system. Would you like to talk about it?
Oh, I'll give it a go. Yeah, it's just like biology 101, this, isn't it? But yeah, my mental health nurse.
Well,
Yeah, it's the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is split into two parts, which you're nodding away. Yeah, like I'm saying, yeah, which is yeah. So
not
it's
bones, but I do know it.
yeah. So on one side you've got the I think this is probably quite a crude reduction, but it's generally so how things are explained and seen. But you've got the sympathetic nervous system. So that is where everything is turned on. So that is when everything's turned up. That's the kind of the fight and flight state. I think now there's like 5 Fs. I don't know what they are: fight, flight, freeze, something or other. And then on the other side, say again, sorry.
It speeds stuff up.
Yeah, and on the other side then is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our kind of rest mode. It's our where everything's sort of turned down. So that's where we digest, where we feel calm, content, relaxed, where we can sleep. Sometimes called, I think one of my colleagues refers to as feed and breed. I quite like. So we have these sort of two states. One is to action, one is the sort of to rest, essentially. So yeah, so I'm not sure how that kind of ties in with sort of depression, but I feel like with depression sometimes people are persistently in the sympathetic, like everything's turned on for long periods of time, everything's turned up, they're releasing all this adrenaline all the time, this cortisol, all the hormones are off whack, and then they have this, I guess things get really low and they just burnt out, I guess. But so I'm not sure how that would necessarily fit in with depression, I suppose. But
well, from what I understand about it, it's you're quite prone to depressive episodes after prolonged periods of stress.
Yeah.
The prolonged period of stress basically has the sympathetic nervous system turned on for a long time, and the parasympathetic nervous system tries to rebalance that, and then it ends up slowing you right the way down. It's almost like it depresses you. It slows you right down. It slows everything down. Your autonomic nervous system controls everything in your body that you're not clever enough to think about. So your guts, your heart rate, breathing, everything, it gets slowed down because you overactivated the speeding up bit and your body's trying to rebalance, and it just pushes it back the other way. The pendulum swings too far the other way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think I wrote a blog the other week on stress, talking about this kind of stuff. But yeah, just appreciating what you said there with that pendulum, isn't it? It's when if you're in this, like if the pendulum swings really high one way, so that everything's geared up, everything's turned on, there's that fallout afterwards, where it swings the other way. Yeah, what I'm guessing now with depression is that pendulum gets caught, isn't it? Doesn't come back.
Yeah. After every sort of prolonged chronic exposure to stress, your chances of having a depressive episode go up precipitously.
Yeah.
If you've got sort of a genetic predisposition to this, you're especially more vulnerable to it from sort of prolonged stress.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's other things that happen in stress that were quite interesting.
Yeah.
There was inflammation. When we're under a hell of a lot of stress, inflammation goes up, and that seriously affects our ability to produce serotonin. And I think it goes against us completely. The pathway in your brain that creates serotonin, which is created from something called tryptophan in your diet, that actually gets actually gets converted into something called quinolinic acid, which is pro-depressive. It's a neurotoxin, and one of the things you can do to counteract that, so if you're having a lot of stress, is to exercise, because exercise will shuttle the quinolinic acid into your muscles instead of having it in your nervous system, essentially.
Yeah.
So that was quite another. I think we could probably have another Andrew Huberman meme going on there, or GIF or something.
Yeah.
There. Yeah. He's a cool guy. You should listen to his podcast. I'll be like, that's how I know any of this.
Yeah, I think as I made a reference to the podcast and writing something the other day. Number 34, it's the depression one. This is really good.
Yeah. You know them by number by heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Then we got then fatigue, which I think is probably already quite self-explanatory with. So I'm looking at the list here. Sorry,
Yeah, I
fatigue.
think you covered
Yeah,
that off.
yeah. Feelings of worthlessness,
Yeah.
guilt nearly every day. I think that links to, I guess, bringing a bit of CBT theory as well. So one of the kind of cognitive behavioral therapy is often used as treatment for depression, and there are lots of kind of ways and different approaches to explain kind of hopelessness or kind of the way we think and feel. But in with CBT, it sort of says that a person who's depressed will often think in certain ways. Still have certain views about themselves. I am worthless. I am no good. I'm bad. I'm not good enough. The world's a dangerous place. People are out to get me. People are bad, or others are better than me. Oh, you have all these sort of real blunt, sorry, strong beliefs. Like they can really kind of feed things in the background. So if you have these sort of beliefs there, they might not be obvious to people, but they might be there in the background. Whenever you're faced with challenges, whenever you're faced with difficulties or problems, if you have let's say you get a job offer, someone who's kind of well or not depressed might go, oh great, it's a really good opportunity. A bit nervous, I'm a bit scared, it's a new thing, but yeah, it's a really good thing for me. I look forward to the challenge. Someone who's really depressed or someone who's feeling really down for a long period of time, well, they might go, oh God, they're going to find out I'm an imposter. I'm not good enough. I'm going to flunk this like I do everything. I'm not good enough. People are better than me, so I don't deserve this. So, and then I think that can really feed that hopelessness, feed all this, feed the depression, feed the cycle. So, yeah, see that again, just see that kind of way of thinking a lot in my day job.
Self-confabulation.
Yeah. Lots of things. Yeah, just low self-esteem. I think simply as well. Just
I think it makes sense if you're in a naturally low mood, you can interpret something differently, aren't you? Something good, you will want to make sense of why do I feel bad? Well, it's obviously not a good thing because that doesn't make any sense. I feel bad and I've got this thing.
Yeah.
To make up a story, we create narratives to make sense of the world, and they will, as you say, they'll take something good that they've done or happened to them and they'll turn it completely around and say, oh, it's not really that good, and they'll start talking it down, and that will literally spiral, get worse and worse.
Yeah, and these ways of thinking as well. For someone who thinks they're not good enough, like we've got enough periods of time, don't we, in our life where things happen and we have these really negative thoughts. But for most people, we sort of can bounce back or can maybe learn to overcome those thoughts. But for some people who are like depressed, especially the like long term, that persistent depression, those low self-esteem thoughts, those really negative beliefs will just linger on. And they don't come they don't come out of the blue. They come because that person has had years of hardship in their life. They've had lots of very difficult stresses, life events have happened. They've been in a deadbeat job for so long, or the manager's been an absolute doing one on them. They've had these exposures to all these things long period of time that leads them to have these really negative beliefs about themselves. A child isn't born with, like, I'm going off a bit of a tangent here, but a child isn't born with low self-esteem thoughts. A child doesn't come into the world going, I'm not good enough. It happens through life. Can be kind of parents, the way kind of parents, sometimes parents, they think they do a good job. Sometimes it can impact us, quite negatively in the future, or we can have kind of caregivers who just say the wrong stuff to us repeatedly, and that can really have these massive knock-on effects. And I think that's often where the hopelessness comes from as well. And again, childhood trauma, I think that's something that's we're becoming very aware of now in kind of media, social media, in mental health sort of services. A term we use is ACEs, which is adverse childhood events. And time and time again, you see people coming in and services, or people who are really struggling, and they've had a lot on their plate in their life, especially in childhood. And that just feeds the whole cycle of mental illness, not just depression there, but yeah. Yeah, sorry, a bit of a tangent there.
Yeah. Where to next?
Then we got sort of diminished ability to think, and concentrate, and decisiveness. I think we kind of covered that, aren't we, with the
Well, I think you could say something a bit more. Um, Depression literally puts us in a state of reduced neuroplasticity. If you're depressed, your brain struggles to make new connections, new neurons. So it is harder to learn, literally. Physically, there's a restriction there.
What is neuroplasticity, Chaz?
Neuroplasticity is our brain's ability to adapt. When we're learning, we're literally making new connections in the brain. And sometimes disposing of old ones. The other thing you could say about that is when you're unable to learn, and sometimes you see this when you're drained, say you're absolutely knackered, you can't take on new information. You become a lot more emotional as well. You're less able to adapt to the context of what's going on around you. For example, someone might say something to you that rubs you up the wrong way. Your ability to learn and adapt to that, to say in your head before you react, oh, that person said something horrible, but if I lash out now, it's going to be bad for me. That's just gone. You can't do that. You can't make those changes, those steps. And so you just react emotionally. So people do, like, they'll snap and be more aggressive, or they'll just react emotionally to things because they can't react logically.
Yeah, that's such an important point to that. I think that's one thing that earlier on I sort of alluded to, that depression is not just feeling down. It can be a range of emotions, and that's exactly it. But what you said there is that threshold to sort of be able to control or manage difficult emotions or manage difficult situations. Your ability to deal with those situations, deal with those kind of emotions, just goes. And so any negative emotion that's there, it's gonna come out when you're depressed. Whether it's severe self-loathing, anger, snappy, irritability, your ability to kind of to have a level head just out of the window, because the emotions are literally in the driver's seat in your sort of frontal, well, your no frontal cortex. Yeah, it's a really important point there, Chaz.
What you got for me?
And then kind of the last one is sort of thoughts of death, recurrent suicidal ideation. And that can be with or without a plan. And I think part of my, when we speak to a lot of people who are depressed, we always ask about, people having thoughts about ending their life, having thoughts not to be here. And again, I've got a blog article on that as well. And almost everyone I speak to, which is just, I say it out loud, it's horrible, it's sad. Everyone I speak to will say, yes, I have thoughts of ending my life. Oh, I have thoughts of not wanting to be here. I wish I could just turn the lights off. I wish I could just escape. So those kind of thoughts are not specific. They're not specific where people, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself by doing this. They're just, I am fed up. I feel like absolute crap. No, I'm so stressed. All this stuff on. I want out. And I will say to people who are in that situation, and I'll say literally, your brain is a supercomputer. It is designed to get you out of hardship. When things are really tough, your brain wants to preserve. Preserve is the wrong way of putting it. Sorry, but it wants to sort of to find a way out of this problem. And sometimes the thought of just not being here or escaping life altogether will come to the sort of forefront. It'll be there. For some people, then having that thought is so shocking and horrible that they think about it, they beat themselves up about having the thought, and that kind of forms a zone cycle then. And think of them, it's horrendous, but yes, I think that just having those thoughts is so common. What's less common, I guess, thankfully, but it unfortunately does happen a lot, is actual planning or preparing to really harm yourself or take your life.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but it is kind of almost like the end state of this disease. I suppose if it's allowed to progress on to a certain state, that's where it gets to.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's so important to normalize like the what's the point thoughts. Because if someone is really depressed, those thoughts are gonna come up at some point.
Yeah.
I'd be hard pressed to find someone who's, ticking the boxes for something like a major depressive disorder or persistent depressive disorder who don't have those thoughts at some point. And those thoughts are okay. It's just your brain's trying to solve a problem that everything's really tough. I feel horrendous. I want out. And you will have those thoughts will just pop in randomly. You don't mean to have those thoughts. You're not sitting there thinking about these thoughts. They just happen. And when they do happen, it's almost seeing them as a symptom. Or it's a side effect of depression, not you. I think sometimes just distancing yourself from that thought those automatic thoughts that pop in. They're not you. That's depression. I think it's a really important thing to sort of people think about because they will come up, and when they come up, people shouldn't beat themselves up or be in shock or be in denial or keep it all locked up, and that makes things worse inevitably. So
yeah. So those are all the symptoms.
Yeah, so that is essentially we just kind of went through the DSM symptoms of depression, and we talked a little bit about them all then, yeah.
I suppose it's probably important to mention that you don't have to have all of those.
No, yeah, and it's I think if someone wants to get diagnosed, it's a doctor, it's a medical doctor or a psychiatric professional like a psychiatrist or some psychologists. They're the ones who would kind of give that formal diagnosis and use that criteria. So yeah, and they're trained to do that. So if someone feels they are depressed, speaking first point call the GP and getting referred to the relevant mental health team to sort of speak to someone about these things.
Yeah. Maybe we could. So obviously that's your first port of call. Get proper help.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could talk about some of the more positive things that you could do to avoid getting into these positions, where you have got to go and seek help, because. Not to talk it down, but there's obviously things you can do to sort of increase your foundation that you're standing on, so you don't end up in that sort of state. Obviously, people do end up there through no fault of their own, but there are things you can do to help.
Yeah.
Any ideas what we should talk about there?
Yeah,
a big open one.
Yeah. I think before we do that, I reckon we should talk a little bit about some ideas about why people get depressed. Was that I think that might be a good point to, because we talk about all the kind of symptoms, haven't we? And we could obviously, I'll wave my hands, could maybe cut this bit out essentially if
No, leaving all that in.
Yeah, so I think so like why people get depressed. What do you reckon, Chaz? Why do people get depressed?
Obviously, you could split it into two big categories. There's the exogenous and endogenous. So exogenous are reasons outside of you, endogenous are reasons inside of you, and they are connected by some degree as well. But obviously things can come along that obviously warrant you feeling depressed, say like a death of a loved one, something like that, a big loss. There are obviously slightly more insidious things that can come along as well, like drug misuse, addictive behaviors as well that sort of almost mimic drug misuse, like gambling, social media use, excessive social media use, things like that can probably trigger them. And then there's more endogenous causes as well. Obviously, there's some people can have there's a genetic predisposition. I've written this down to sound clever, but there's the 5-HTT-LPR, which is a polymorphism of a gene that controls serotonin in the brain, and if you've got that, then that opens you up
Yeah.
to be predisposed to depression.
I've heard that compared to like the gene for maybe being overweight. That it's almost like eating food or eating too much food can make you overweight, whether you got the gene or not. So it's similar to that kind of depression. It's almost like it doesn't mean someone's going to get depressed, but it just means that if you're in the kind of if you're under a lot of stress, if you're under a lot of difficulty, if you're doing all the wrong stuff, you're far more likely to become depressed. Yeah, so it's almost like that, comparing it to a gene for being overweight, if there was one.
Yeah, so dig me out this hole, Paul.
Yeah. So yeah,
you're like,
yeah, no,
about this. No, I'm not helping you.
no. So like, yes, I think you touched on the two kind of big points there. That sometimes it's an internal thing, isn't it? Sometimes it's an external sort of thing. I think I was talking earlier about like adverse childhood events.
Yeah.
Which there's a lot of evidence now on childhood trauma, being around addiction, being around drugs, alcohol, abuse. These things play a huge part in lots of mental health difficulties and lots of physical health difficulties. I can't remember the doctor's name. There's a couple of doctors in the States who came to the same conclusion and ended up kind of working together and setting up sort of clinics in America, working on these adverse childhood events and seeing like the person is a holistic thing for mental health and physical. And the findings are really scary and shocking. And I see it time and time again. Clients who come to services who just struggling with all sorts of mental health difficulties, often depression is there. They've been through the mill, been through childhood trauma. And I think that and I'm not talking about like PTSD here. I'm not talking about a post-traumatic stress disorder or anything. But people who've just gone through a lot of stuff, a lot of really kind of hardship in life. And because when someone goes through something very difficult, if a child is in a very unsettling environment, that child will learn to they gotta be a fight to survive. They gotta maybe stay quiet and meek in order just to appease people, or that they're not good enough, or maybe they've been told they're not good enough. All these things will feed into that person's way of seeing the world, their view, their self-esteem, their beliefs on the world. And so when they grow up, then they sometimes when they face them with the modern world and kind of adulthood, they get depressed much easier. It's really, really sad, and I think we really underestimate the role of lifehood, of like the childhood events that can really shape us for the worse. For the worst. What else? So, I think thinking as well. I think it's a tough one. It's a tough one to deal with, and sometimes people need kind of therapy. But often people think very negatively. They think in very unhelpful ways that really feed or maintain difficulties. So that can really add things as well. Okay. So Charles, I mentioned a couple of times to you a book by Johann Hari called Lost Connections, and this is a guy who had struggled with the lived experience of depression from a very young age. He was on antidepressants for a number of years, and in his books, I think it's a really great book for people who are interested in it. But he lists a range of causes of depression, and we've already covered quite a few of them today anyway. But includes kind of bad work environment, isolation, so your economic background, stressors, disconnection from people, work, and nature, childhood traumas we've been talking about, kind of hopelessness, loss of values. All these things can really feed depression, and it's not necessarily the serotonin theory or the low serotonin be a chemical imbalance that causes depression. It's it's other stuff, it's all the other stuff that goes on that kind of leads to depression, I think. And I see it time and time again in my job.
Yeah, I mean, there are other causes, and there's a temptation straight away as well, isn't there, to dive straight in and say, let's fix this biologically. really the depression is being caused by something that's going on in someone's life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, if you go to a doctor and you ask for help and the tools they have in their bag are a hammer, be the SSRIs, and you go at them and say, "I've got this nail," they're going to hit it with a hammer, aren't they? So yeah, that's the impression I got from reading his book. Anyway, was that he was getting a bit down on the medicalization of depression and just go straight in with SSRIs.
Yeah, it's really tough one. And I've not like dove into the evidence about it really, but there's obviously there's an article recently, Moncrief et al, and they talk about basically discounting all the evidence for serotonin theory being a cause of depression. So meaning that low serotonin in the brain causes depression. But when it comes to SSRI medication, if you look at the NICE guidance, so it's kind of the kind of guidance that health professionals in the UK follow. They base their recommendations on very, very large control trials, also analyses of a range of control trials. So and this says that antidepressants work. It maybe not as much as people hope, but they do work. And I think that if you're someone who's struggling with major depressive disorders, your symptoms are acute and significant. Antidepressant might take you from being really, really bad to being pretty bad, which could be a very big improvement. That could be the difference between someone wanting to take their life to someone just thinking about it. Yeah, and they're not for everyone. But I think first and foremost, people should sort of speak to their GP about any medication changes. There's a lot more complexity to it than just saying it's not a chemical imbalance. It's far more complex than that, I think.
Yeah, it's not really our place to sort of question.
Exactly.
They have done a large meta-analysis. It's shown something. There's going to be lots of debate around that now, and we'll let the boffins figure that one out. I mean, there's obviously stuff that we can do, which doesn't require medication.
Yeah, and I will literally say to people often said people who kind of question clients, do I take medication? If you can do things to feel better, whether that's sleep better, eat better, all the good stuff, and feel better as a result, that should be priority.
Yeah.
If you can't, maybe there are other options. Speak to your doctor about it. Or if you try these things but still feel rubbish, maybe there are other options. Speak to your doctor about it. But first and foremost, I think people wanting to look after themselves, trying to do the right things to look after themselves, that should be on the top of everyone's list if they're struggling with a mental health or depression, for example.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss? Because you wanted to talk about the factors that cause depression.
Yeah. I think just kind of want to finish that bit off, just saying that there are lots of different paths to depression. It could be a biological element. It could be a chemical element, potentially. It could be a genetic element, potentially. But the vast majority of people who get depressed is because life has thrown stuff at them. And as a result, they feel a certain way, they think a certain way, behave a certain way. And we all got it in us to kind of to make little changes to these things to make ourselves feel better and maybe sort of stave off or beat depression or manage depression. So wherever the cause is, I think there's always things that people can do to sort of start to make changes, improve their mental health.
What changes would you recommend?
Changes. I get it. Obviously, you know this. People listening to this know this, but it varies from person to person, and everyone is different, and everyone has their unique sort of needs. But I think, firstly, and I say this time and time again. You probably heard me say it before, but just sweat the small stuff, and that is working on your sleep, making sure you're eating well. Not eating, too much of the bad stuff. You've got a good sort of balanced diet, connecting to nature, you're exercising, all the small stuff. And I want to say exercise, I don't mean just going to the gym every day. I mean just getting outside, go for a walk. If you're able to go for a run, if you do go to the gym, go to the gym. If you can go to the gym with people, go to the gym with people around you. All these little things. And all the simple stuff. And can I go through the list here, Chaz? Would you mind?
You've got a list. Okay.
I've got a list, yeah. So again, this list here comes from the Mental Health Foundation, and they carried out this huge, I'd say, groundbreaking study, which I don't mean to diss the boffins of the Mental Health Foundation, but they've come up with a list that you would think would be common sense to most people. The fact that, and the list kind of,
there's something that sums this up, isn't there? Where the simpleton ends up in the same position as the expert.
yeah.
I can't remember what
but
that's called. I gotta look it up at some point.
Yeah. So these are the mental tips. I think it's no specific order, but nature, being in nature is one. Learning to understand feelings and how to manage them. Talking to the people they trust and support. Don't use drugs or alcohol to cope. Getting help with debts and finances. Creating a better world. So what I mean by that is helping others. Exercise, eating healthy, being open to new experiences, and plan things to look forward to. So that they are the final recommendations of a range of health professionals kind of writing this. There's a huge kind of journal article on it, and that's what they come up with, which sound painfully obvious, don't they? They sound obvious, but I guess the issue is the people who are really struggling don't do those things. I certainly don't do those things when I'm feeling really down. But so yeah, they're the kind of things that people should really be thinking about.
Yep. Should we do what we did at the start? We go through those one by one.
Yeah, go for it.
I like. What was the first one? It was getting in nature.
Nature, yeah.
What do we mean by nature?
Naturism,
it's a really obscure kind of hippie sounding. Not to trash on hippies.
There are a range of studies. I've not seen these exact studies. I've heard of them, but a range of studies of simply just being around greenery, being outside in forests and in nature by the sea. There's kind of a huge impact on just our well-being in the moment. They can be very mindful experiences. They're kind of can be very peaceful. Range of benefits. And most people who access nature are going to be doing some form of exercise at the same time, or can be doing it with other people. It's win-win then.
Sounds like one of those things where it's packaging up a lot of stuff there. You mentioned obviously there's a bit of exercise involved there, but also it sounds like almost a decompression. You're getting out away from all the stimulus that you'd have in an unnatural environment like this office, where I'm surrounded by monitors and lights and things that are grabbing my attention, constantly stimulating me. As I mentioned earlier, with dopamine, you need that sort of decompression phase where you're being continuously stimulated, you're continuously seeking something, like you're working, burning the candle at both ends. You need a period where you're decompressing, allowing those levels of dopamine to come back down again to a normal level. That sounds to me more what they're getting out there.
I'm sure. I think it's just simpler than that. I think that when you're outside walking around, you're spending less time thinking about bad stuff. You're spending more time concentrating on where you're walking, looking at stuff, and it's quite in that way. I think it's quite a mindful experience where you're not sort of trapped, getting hooked on all the negative thoughts and emotions you experience it, and you're more outward. So I think it can be that simple for people. Certainly me anyway. If I'm running, say in a local park or down a coastal path in where we live, it's very hard to think about bad stuff when you're not trying to fall over or trip over a rock.
What was number 2?
Learn to understand and manage feelings. Which
I mean, this can probably trace this back to your what you mentioned earlier about childhood experiences. when we're very young, that is when we develop our ability to control and integrate all of our emotions into sort of a solid human. But yeah, we need to understand that we have emotions. We shouldn't let them dictate to us. We should try and incorporate them into our character. Have you got any thoughts on that one?
I think just recognizing that I'm nicking lots of ideas here from an approach called acceptance commitment therapy. For those who are interested in that, I would recommend looking at Russ Harris's book, Happiness Trap. But it's the idea of just accepting emotions as being just human experience. The things that are just innate to you. You're going to feel sad. You're going to have all these difficult things. We often have these emotions for a reason, and emotions don't dictate what we should do next as well. So just understanding anger, for example, we get angry when there's an injustice or when there's a slight on us or something really gets under our skin. We might get really angry, but it's just an emotion. You don't have to be aggressive. You don't have to do things, act on that anger. So I think sometimes having that awareness of just emotions are these things that we feel. We don't have to do anything about them. We've got the ability to not bottle up is the wrong way of putting it, but we've got the ability to sort of just feel those emotions as they are, and then just wait to respond to those emotions. I think that's a really important thing for people to consider as well.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier as well, that ability to context switch. So you get an emotion because something happens, someone calls you a rude word. You don't naturally have to react using that emotion. There is a mechanism in you that allows you to step back, assess the situation, and decide what your action should be. I can't remember the exact details. I think Andrew Huberman was discussing them with Jordan Peterson on his podcast. Our ability to context switch, where we can adapt and change the context of the environment that we're in. As I said earlier, that I guess our ability to do that is depleted when we're depressed and we react emotionally. So sometimes there is a bit of a biological factor there that you can't always control that as well, but we should be able to control our emotions, and it's something that you can practice as well.
Yeah, I think it's almost like, even though just saying that control your emotions, it's not even that. I think it's just being like almost sort of being aware of your emotions. I think because we can't control emotions. I think it's accepting when you can't control your emotions.
Oh, you're not going to stop yourself from feeling something. But
that
doesn't have to precipitate action in the real world, does it?
Exactly, yeah. And often when we are controlled by emotions and we respond with our emotions, if it's sadness or anger, for example, you're going to respond in a very sad or very angry way. And often those responses will just feed the whole cycle of feeling depressed or feeling angry. So sometimes just feeling those emotions, accepting them, being aware of them, and just thinking about your next steps a bit more thoughtfully, I think is hard to do, but I think that's the kind of path we should try and take.
Yeah.
What's next? It's talk to someone you trust and support. Anything want to say on that, Charles?
Talking's important. It's part of our thinking process. Being able to sort of vocalize your thoughts helps you understand them, helps you learn. So it is very important. Sometimes we can feel a certain way about something, but when we talk through it with someone else, it allows us to process it and realize, no, we shouldn't be feeling that way about that. It's not really as serious as I thought it was, or doesn't warrant that emotion as much.
Yeah.
It's very important to talk to someone, especially someone you trust as well.
Yeah.
You feel you can be more open with them.
Yeah, I agree with everything said, and just thinking about a bit of evolutionary psychology and my very amateur understanding of it as well. We are social creatures. We are meant to be in communities and tribes and family units, and being able to have people around you trust and support. Not necessarily to talk about your mental health necessarily, but just be able to talk to people about a range of things. Have people who can look after you if you need help, or you can look after them if you need help. And it's hugely important. I think it's sad that we live in kind of these vast sprawls of populations and people, and then people are isolated still. I think this is really sad, and a lot of people don't have people they can talk to and trust and support. But I think for people who don't, there's so many, whether it's organizations or clubs or projects, there are lots of people can talk to.
Yeah, as you said before, mental health problems can build up from problems that occur outside in the real world, and instead of talking about mental health, you can talk through those problems with someone else.
Yeah,
it takes a load off. So you're an evolutionary psychologist, then, are you, or biologist?
No, of course not.
That must be your Brett Weinstein podcast that you're listening to there.
Yeah, probably a bit ahead of high. Yeah, no, yeah,
That's
right.
Yeah, we are podcast academics, definitely.
Yeah, that's right. I definitely, if there's a bachelor's equivalent of listening to podcasts, I've definitely got that. Yeah.
Okay, so what we got next?
No drugs or alcohol to cope.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is something I see time and time again. Drugs and alcohol aren't bad on their own necessarily. I wouldn't obviously recommend anyone takes any drugs or binge drinks or anything. But they're often some people drugs, some people alcohol. They're social lubricants. They're part of bonding with people. They can be an enjoyable experience for a lot of people. But it's when they're used as a way to deal with problematic thoughts or emotions. If someone feels sad or they're anxious, or I know we're talking about depression. If someone's really depressed, a couple of spliffs, a few pints will make that person probably feel a lot better temporarily. And that will soon fade. And I think we talked about the pendulum earlier and that dopamine sort of pleasure and pain scale that's going on as well. People will fall into that trap of, I feel rubbish, I'll have a spliff or I'll have a pint. And then that wears off and that person feels rubbish again. And that person's brain will want to seek out the fastest, quickest way to just feel better again. It doesn't matter what that thing is, the brain will convince that person. If that person's really kind of low and on that very low threshold, and to drink again or to smoke again or whatever it might be. And that's often where addictions can sort of really take hold as well. So yeah, using alcohol and drugs to cope is a no, I think, for people.
Yeah.
Good rule of thumb. If you feel like rubbish, don't drink alcohol or drugs, even if there's a social occasion. We should be kind of doing these things when we feel good and we're doing it for the right reasons, I think. In an ideal world, I know real life is not as easy as that, is it? But...
Yeah, obviously, but using drugs to escape a problem doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
So it's still there when you sober up.
Obviously, usually it's still there when you sober up, but it's a little bit worse. And then next time it's a little bit worse. Next time it's a little bit worse. And that person needs more there to sort of feel that, that hit of dopamine, essentially.
Yeah, there's a lot of drugs work on they're dopaminergic. They work on that system as well. So there's a real insidious feedback loop there where you take the drug and the release of dopamine or the effect on the dopamine receptors actually acts as reinforcement for the activity of taking the drug. What you're learning is, and what you're becoming is, a drug addict, essentially. Even when you start off, like, you're reinforcing the drug taking behavior. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
You do the behavior of taking the drugs and you're getting the dopamine release, which is the same as you do something that results in something successful, that lead up to that, the behavior that you took up to that gets reinforced. That's how we learn skills, per se. And the skill that you learn is drug taking. So, yeah, obviously there's more socially acceptable drugs, but at a base level, that's what happens.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the same can be said for other addictive behaviors too.
Yeah,
I remember like I was in a bit of a years ago now, a bit of a rut, but I remember ever played World of Warcraft, Jazz?
no, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, I remember playing that for literally a month straight as a full-time job, essentially. And I remember looking in the mirror going, what the hell have I done to myself? Um, and that just chasing that dopamine, just that escapism. But it's a recipe for disaster. I think gaming addiction now is such a huge problem, especially with young men as well.
It's worse now because the games are designed to be more addictive as well. I don't know if you've noticed that they're designed much more like the cheap mobile games, the freemium gaming that you get on mobile phones. And they look more and more like just basically games you tend to see in a pub on one of them sort of slot machines or fruit machines.
Yeah, you referred to Roblox there,
Candy Crush and things like that. It's horrendous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To go with the next one. So yeah, next one is finances and debt, which I think those things can act as chronic stresses, can't they? Those things can just persist, and be in the background niggling away.
They can do, yes. Obviously, money is very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really think I can say much more than that, to be honest.
Yeah. Sleep. I think we should do a podcast on sleep, Jazz.
Yeah, you can do a whole podcast on it.
Yeah.
The anecdote I always go back on when we talk about sleep and how important it is there was a study in America. They took a bunch of students. They were college students. They were like your jock types, your really fit, healthy guys. Sleep deprived them 4 hours sleep a night for like 3 nights. They took their blood before and after the study. Their blood after the study, they were pre-diabetic. It screwed them up that much that they essentially had the same blood as someone who was chronically obese and had loads of other things going on. It was just horrendous. Sleep is so important. And there's loads of other things that happen in your sleep which are critical for your mental health.
Yeah.
Just get some sleep.
Yeah, 7.5 hours plus.
Yeah, you want to avoid huge amounts of stimulation in the evening. Try not to drink caffeine after midday. Wind down before bed. Read a book or something without bright lights. Just chillax before bed. But yeah, we can do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah, I think the big thing there, a lot of evidence I've read recently is early morning, set your alarm, same time every day, early morning sunlight. That's the
you want to be
regular for sleep.
You want to be regular with your sleep, and the thing that you can control is when you wake up. It's harder to force yourself off to sleep, but if you set your alarm for every day, then you'll naturally tend to get tired at the same time every evening.
Yeah.
And it's better to be asleep from the hours of midnight onwards, because that's when our body goes through a lot of circadian related sort of activities that triggered at a certain time of night. So I always try and be in bed and off to sleep from about 9:30 to 10 onwards, so that I'm definitely asleep from 12 till about 4, when my body's doing a lot of the stuff like repair and things like that it should be doing.
Yeah.
Try not to be awake at night. It's not good for you. Obviously, it's unavoidable sometimes, but
I don't miss night shifts, that's for sure.
Yeah, they make you feel like hell.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so next is create a better world. So I guess helping others.
Yeah. You could potentially talk about existentialism there. You're doing something outside of yourself, giving yourself a bigger purpose.
Yeah.
You're leaving a stamp on the world that's positive. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's doing helping others. It does so much for our kind of self-esteem and how we see ourselves, and it adds value. And you mentioned the kind of existentialism. It does gives us purpose. It gives us value. I suppose that sometimes I have difficulty with depression, and we're talking about depression, is that some people can think in such a negative way or be a biased way that even if they help others, they will tell themselves they'll tell themselves that, they're not worthy of any kind of self-praise or but yeah, I think helping others is important, but I think sometimes it can almost be a detriment to people who are really depressed sometimes.
Yeah. And one thing that's jumping into my mind there is your ability to sort of interact with someone else also affects your ability to interact with yourself. You are a person in the greater scheme of things. So if you are able to work with other people, you'll cut yourself more slack as well. Your ability to empathize with someone, understand them, accept their shortfallings, that's also something that you're practicing that you can then transfer to yourself and cut yourself a bit more slack. I'm being really sketchy with this, but the best way to describe it is it's like a skill, and that skill is transferable. Your ability to help other people will affect your ability to help yourself. Does that make sense?
Makes absolute sense. Yeah, that's really spot on.
Doesn't sound like it should make sense when I hear the words coming out of my mouth.
No. I think we talk about that sort of thing in regards to compassion sometimes, and often this is used in compassion focused therapy, another approach. And it's kind of what I said there. Sometimes it's just almost treating yourself like you treat a loved one.
Yeah.
Really hard to do in practice. Really hard to do if someone's really depressed, because that just doesn't come naturally. But you have to build that skill, Chaz, exactly like you said. So you hit the nail on the head there.
And when your bucket's empty, when you're really depressed, then being able to fall back on a well-practiced skill is a lot easier than being able to develop one from scratch.
Yeah.
So if you do practice it on other people, it makes it a lot easier to do yourself, love yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else left on there? Was that done?
No, there's a couple of things, but I know we're on the end of time here, aren't we? So
yeah. Go on then.
Yeah. So other things then people can sort of do to help with sort of depression is exercise. Keep moving. I think this again, we should probably do an entire podcast on this. And I think it's one of those intuitions that other people generally accept, that exercise in various forms can be hugely beneficial to our mental health. I think particularly depression.
Yeah.
What do you think, Chaz?
Yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail on it because we could talk about it for hours, and I haven't got excessive notes on it. But I suppose if you wanted the top level answer, if your body's working well, it's going to be the best platform for your head to be mounted on. That's probably as far as I really want to go right now, because there are lots of facets to that.
Yeah. I think, just to add to that, exercise, often it's a very social thing as well for some people. I think that can just add another layer of connections and sort of benefits as well.
Exercise is great to go through a bit of suffering voluntarily with someone else.
Yeah.
That will build a really strong bond. That's for sure.
Yeah. So we'll definitely dedicate an entire chat about that, I think, Chaz.
Yeah.
Then next one, eating healthy.
Eating healthy.
Yeah.
Again, there's layers to this pyramid. I really want to start off with your sleep, working on your mindset. The next one up's nutrition. You are what you eat. It's the building blocks of you. That's for sure. One of the big things to mention though with nutrition, fish oil, omega-3s, something that we really, really miss in our diet here. It's something that I believe the Nords do quite a lot. They know about it. They take their fish oil every day.
Yeah.
In the winter when they tend to get depressed. The reason behind that being it's anti-inflammatory. there's different types of essential fatty acids. The omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. The ones that tend to be quite high in Western diets, I think it's your omega-6s and 9s, they're pro-inflammatory. So when we eat these fats, they go into making up our cells in our body. If something happens in our body, say during exercise, you break down muscle. If you have high blood pressure, it damages your vascular walls. You get cell damage. Those cells are then broken down through metabolic pathways. Your pro-inflammatory ones will actually create inflammation. Omega-3s decrease it. So if you have more omega-3 in your diet and so forth in your body, it actually decreases inflammation. And then inflammation in the brain can actually interrupt the pathways where you make things like dopamine and serotonin. So that can affect those levels in your brain. So high inflammation can lead to low levels of neurotransmitter, which can lead to depression.
Yeah, just talking about omega-3, I bought like the tablets. I realized there's higher EPA in the kind of bottle stuff. This is vile. I had this like image, a memory of being force fed as a child.
Well, the actual oil itself is
the actual oil, yeah. What I've discovered is it's for those people who want to take a cheap alternative that's got higher levels of the good stuff in it. To add it with a glass of water, and it sits on the water because it's obviously lighter, and you can usually drink it without the oil actually touching your tongue. It's vile. Yeah.
When I eat like a psychopath, so when I go to the gym, I have a box of cooked chicken, almonds, pumpkin seeds, a piece of fruit of some kind in there, like banana or orange, and I usually chuck in my my cod liver oil and my glucosamine tablets in there as well. Yeah. And I sat there working away on my laptop in between workouts, eating my lunch, picking out almonds, pick one out, put it in my mouth, bit into it. It was a cod liver oil tablet. The coaches saw me run so fast to the toilet. I was there glugging down water. I was almost sick. It was disgusting. It was absolutely foul stuff.
Yeah. And I think I'm quoting Andrew Huberman here as well, just from memory of his podcast on depression. I'm sure he said there's some big studies. There's some big studies that are kind of put on a par with antidepressive kind of effectiveness. It's on the same kind of level of benefit as an antidepressant of some people. I don't know the details of the study or anything like that, but that's interesting, isn't it? They're just, I guess, that anti-inflammation that it kind of helps. Yeah, so eat healthy, and I think, as you said at the beginning there, we are the building. Our food is the building blocks of us, and it's very important.
Again, I think we'll do a whole podcast on nutrition easily.
Most definitely. Then just one more here is plan things to look forward to. Anything to add there, Chaz?
Yeah, I think it's a bit deeper than that. Planning things to look forward to. Life is difficult. You need something to live for. Someone who has a why can live through any how is a great expression. So you should have an overarching goal in your life, something big, probably something that you'll never really attain. If you go back to earlier, we mentioned that it's the pursuit of something as opposed to actually attaining it. Because when you attain it, you then get that massive drop off, that anticlimax. That's a word everyone knows, anticlimax. But it's the leading up to it that we really enjoy. So you probably want to have a big overarching goal. I mean, loads of us had these when we were kids. We wanted to be an astronaut or be something like that. But for some reason in life, we shed it away. Even if it's unattainable, something that you can always work towards, you'll get pleasure from that. And from that big goal, you can then get smaller goals. You might want to be an astronaut, which means you need certain academic qualifications. You could always work towards some of those academic qualifications, even if they're big goals. The ones that feed into those want to go back to night school and get GCSE maths because you want to then go off to college and get A-level maths, which then go off to university and get a degree in maths to then go off and be an astronaut. Little goals that we can work towards that you can always gain a bit of pleasure from in pursuing those. You need something overarching like that. I think that's probably as deep as we want to go into, because again, it's another podcast in itself.
Yes. So at the beginning, they said that I guess it's like appreciating the journey, not the end goal, essentially, isn't it? Yeah,
we do.
There's a lot of there, like the links ties in with kind of Stoic principles as well that I often I read about and I try and follow. There's a lot to be said there. So
yeah, again, I mumbled through it, but a good way to look at that, if you want a basic framework to scaffold out yourself to come up with this, you want to understand where you are, you want a narrative about where you've come from, and you want somewhere that you want to go. And then when you're working towards that goal of where you want to go, you will get pleasure from it. You'll see that you're moving towards that target, and that will give you pleasure, as opposed to maybe if you look at that final point on your list, planning for things that will give you pleasure, you don't want short-term payoffs like that. You don't want to say, well, I'm planning for pleasure, I want to go to a theme park, have a little ride and a roller coaster, big woohoo. And then once you've done that, you've got another drop-off point, haven't you?
yeah,
an anticlimax. So I've done that now. Where am I going to next? Well, actually, if you've got that long-term arc that you're following, you've always got somewhere to go to next, somewhere that you can work towards, and your journey along that path will give you some kind of payoff, some kind of pleasure.
Yeah, yes, yeah, spot on. I think I agree with everything you said there. Again, adding the planning as well, and I think just thinking about depression and specific depression, and that there are treatment approaches that build on kind of making little plans as well. I think for some people who are really depressed, really in it, I guess what you're saying there, the kind of the end, the appreciating the journey and doing things. Sometimes people can't quite achieve that or be able to do those things. So I think sometimes it's really important to plan really tiny incremental steps just to have positive experiences, whether it's just doing one thing that day or just cleaning something or spending a lot of time with someone. Those really kind of small little steps. And there's an approach called behavioral activation, which is an approach that's kind of recommended in NICE guidance to some extent. And there's a lot of kind of therapeutic approaches you can do, but behavioral activation helps people understand, helps them plan a better week, essentially, helps them spot problematic behaviors and maybe make things worse and help them plan things in that makes things better. It's a simple approach, I suppose, but it's simple because people who are really depressed sometimes aren't able to make those kind of big changes. But yeah, so that's behavioral activation is the kind of approach there.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, there's almost a bit of a contradiction in what we were saying there, and the reason for that is what I was describing as at your higher end. If you're fortunate enough to be in that position where you're not suffering from depression, that's something you can do that will help ward off depression.
Definitely. Yeah.
Whereas someone who's in the depths of depression is at the other end of that spectrum, and they need to be able to build themselves back up slowly to a point where they can get to that stage where they could then, build up to go on. A lot of this stuff, it's almost like you can fall into a pit, but equally you can build yourself up to greater heights if you're not falling down there. It's really tricky.
Yeah. You made me think of a bit of a cheesy metaphor, but often we use with depression is that you wouldn't wait. If you say you're lost on a mountain, you wouldn't wait till you're out of food, out of water, and it's nighttime to get help. You would get help as soon as you know you're lost. And so this idea of just doing things kind of proactively, doing things despite not feeling great because they're good for you, and it's the better things for you rather than waiting
Yeah.
be really depressed, when finding motivation or being able to draw upon your self-discipline is, it's a losing battle then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so again, that's the kind of list there of things, Chaz. And I think I think I want to kind of point to there is Johann Hari talks about this a lot as well. And it's something that we often push in my job, and I think GPs now pushing a lot, is social prescribing. So rather than a GP or a health professional giving someone say a tablet or something, prescribing a social activity. So saying there's a particular project or a particular club or a particular thing that's going on in the area, get down and give that a go on doctor's orders, kind of thing. And social prescribing and these things, they work. I've so many people I've spoke to who are struggling with long-term difficulties, who are on a range of medication and things and still struggling, and they get the most benefit out of doing something with other people. I remember one, I won't go into detail because I'm conscious I spent a lot of time talking to you, Chaz, but I remember working with a guy who really depressed. He had a range of other severe health conditions and mental health conditions as well. And he managed to get a volunteer job in a bike shop. And within weeks, this was a different person. He was so proud of himself, learning a skill on how to fix men bikes, something he never even imagined in a million years he'd be able to do or could even do in the first place. And that made such a significant difference to that person. So I'm not saying everyone needs to go and volunteer at the local bike shop, but there are so many things out there that people can do. Whether it's clubs, whether it's kind of what we're going to be doing with Stand Tall and now getting guys to lift weights and learn about sort of mental health. These things can make huge differences that don't involve, the typical medical approaches.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of, we've talked about loads today, Chaz. We've talked about, I guess we've gone through all the kind of symptoms of depression, using the sort of the kind of the diagnostic criteria as a bit of a guide there. We've talked, haven't we, about the kind of causes of depression. We've talked about all the things people can maybe do with depression. Anything else we want to ask or talk about?
No, I think that it's a bit frustrating because I feel like I want to go off on a deep dive on all these different subjects.
Yeah, same here. I feel myself kind of trying to hold myself back, even though I do ramble on a bit. Yeah,
so much isn't it? Yeah, a lot of the rambling is coming from the fact that we're trying to hold ourselves back. You feel like you want to explain something, but you're like kind of pulling yourself back and going, no, we need to save that, because each one of these things we can go into we could talk another hour and a half on each one of the things we talked about, I think, easily.
Yeah. So I wouldn't mind just maybe mentioning some of the options people can maybe do.
I think that'd be really useful.
Yeah, so there are a range of approaches and treatments for depression. I think if someone feels like they might be struggling with some of the symptoms of depression, maybe stop Googling symptoms and maybe speak to a health professional. Now, in GP surgeries, there are mental health workers there you could talk to. There are well-being workers you can talk to, or your GP. And if needed, go to get referred to a specialist, get referred to maybe a primary mental health team who can see you and provide a range of interventions. And there's a range. There are lots of different approaches. The main ones being sort of cognitive behavioral therapy approaches delivered in sometimes one-to-one work, group work. There are a lot of online options as well, a lot of Zoom things, a lot of courses available. Acceptance commitment therapy, something I mentioned. Russ Harris's book, Happiness Trap, is a really good introduction to that. There are lots of courses being run on acceptance commitment therapy too. There's behavioral activation, which is another approach. Again, available online courses, one-to-one work, group work. There's so many specific treatments out there that are being, that have a strong evidence base that work for depression. So they're the kind of, again, the more treatment side of things. But then, as the things you mentioned, that social prescribing, that doing things that are good for us, all the good stuff, they should be on the top of the list too, I think.
Yeah.
So I won't say much more about kind of all the treatments available there. I think, but fundamentally, it's about speaking to someone, a professional, GP, mental health practitioner, or the wellbeing workers in surgery, and having a chat about this. There's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of help out there, and I think often the thing that the barrier to getting help is fear of stigma when actually there isn't any stigma there. Often, I think often the fear of stigma is the problem. It's not actual stigma itself. And I often find that people will, 99 times out of 100, just talking about difficulties to someone benefits them a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The main thing to do is to do something.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything in life, isn't it? You're scared of it until you start doing it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So, Charles, I really enjoyed that chat. I don't know how long we've been talking for. I'm not sure how many tangents we went off on, but I think it was really, really fun to talk about. Even though it's about a very horrible subject, but it's very interesting to talk about.
yeah, I think I do need some sleep now, though. My buzz is starting to wear off from the caffeine.
Yeah.
Well after midday.
Yeah.
Do what we say, not what we do.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right, then. You off for a good sleep now, Paul?
I am, yes. Yeah. Got a daddy daycare tomorrow, so I need my sleep for that, Charles. That's for sure.
Nice. I'm on leave, so I've got to go and grow my beard back. I've been ordered to by my wife.
Yeah. Yeah. That's looking good. Like you've got a bit of stubble there, Charles. It's growing back quite quick, I think.
I think
looks good.
The fact that the first thing my wife said to me was grow it back is not a good sign.
Yeah.
Cover up quick. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So Charles, lots of food for thought now for future podcasts. I think there were so many things we could have talked about for hours more. I hope we've covered the main bits of depression.
We started, so I think we'll say goodbye. Good night to the audience then.
Good night.
Yep.